Hi, I'm Steve Barlow. This is the Humanised Workforce Future You podcast video, where we're talking about perceptions of the future, issues that we need to be aware of, and their role in a rapidly changing work and life environment.
Hi, I'm Craig Saffin. The Humanised Workforce Future You podcast series is focused on the key factors evolving to create a more humanised workforce and how people from all walks of life are creating their future selves. Today on the Humanised Workforce Future You podcast, we're going to continue our discussion from last session where we started talking about optimism. And today, the optimism discussion will continue with a new angle. But just to recap, in the last session, we talked about how optimism was all about solving problems and in finding yourself in a difficult situation and being able to work through a problem-solving process and get some results so that the situation improved. And we talked about this as being the story of human progress, about humans that are able to solve problems. And we also talked about different types of leadership and the requirement for an authentic leadership. But today, I want to ask Steve to talk about high level, what are we going to talk about today as far as optimism is concerned?
Yeah, okay, Craig. I thought today we'd look at the concept of a bit more depth, the concept of the grounds for optimism. And I think we should address two main issues. One is the capacity that we have to be adaptable. And the second issue is the capacity that we have to change things in our environment. And I think that these two things together give us the reason why we can be optimistic about the future. So let's go there and begin by talking about our capacity as human beings to adapt. So adapt has got the idea of changing things, really, but there are two aspects to this. I think there's the capacity that we have to change things or to adapt things in our environment to suit our needs. So sometimes there are things in our environment that don't help us to achieve what we want to achieve in life. And therefore we can look at ways of adapting these things, of changing them so that they better suit us. And the second aspect of this is that sometimes we may not be able to change the things in our environment so easily unless we adapt ourselves first. So we need to change ourselves. And we can do both of these things. We can't necessarily change everything in our environment, but we can change a lot of things. And we may not be able to change everything about ourselves, but we can change a lot of things. And therefore, we can be optimistic about the future because we can do that. So that's kind of the first part of it, Craig, that I thought we could look at today.
Yeah, the adapting pieces and being able to adapt is quite interesting, isn't it? I remember the old cliched saying about do as I say, not as I do, right? So often spoken by people who are unable to adapt themselves, but expected others to. So anyhow, I think that, over the last couple of years, we've seen some amazing examples of how humans can adapt. And, when the pandemic hit us, it could have been total calamity and it was a very difficult time, but humans, I was so amazed at how humans were able to adapt. And, airlines just stopped flying and they deposited their fleet into the deserts around the world so they didn't deteriorate. And people worked from home and a lot of things happened and lockdowns happened and people had to stay at home or not go anywhere. And people just did it. They did it. And I thought that was an incredible change that was about survival, but it was also a great illustration of how adaptable people are. And I think we see that in our day-to-day all the time in smaller examples, but that's one of the biggest and momentous ones I can remember in the recent history.
I mean, I always find it interesting that it's a bit of a mixed bag. Like if you look at different animals, and some animals are very niche dependent. They can only exist in a very small environment, in a very specific type of environment. And if that environment changes too much, then they might go extinct. But if you look at human beings, we have managed to survive in virtually every kind of environment that the planet has.
Yes.
We can exist in the desert. We can exist in the frozen tundra. We can exist on high mountains. We can exist on sort of more fertile and temperate climates. So humans have got this amazing ability, and we can even now exist in low Earth orbit.
Correct. Yeah.
And we can probably even exist in the future on Mars. So we've got this capacity to do that. But one of the reasons we can do it is because we change these environments. So if we end up living on Mars, we're going to have to change Mars over time to more suit us.
Yes.
And, people adapt to all these different environments by changing their environments.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that you can see that in the pandemic, how people got on with it and they adapted and so on. But then the other side of that coin is that a lot of people don't handle this adaptability too well.
Right.
They get stressed by it. They pay a high price for it.
Yeah, they do. Yes, I agree.
Staying.
And that's been illustrated by the huge amount of mental illness that's come out of the pandemic. I think that's a very tangible outcome of that, isn't it?
And I've got some clues as to why this happens, which we can talk about perhaps in another episode. So it is a bit of a mixed bag, but I mean, we do this changing our circumstances, changing our environment, and changing ourselves. We do them both together. It's not one or another. It's both happening at the same time, really. So you think about changing our environment to suit ourselves.
Yes.
And we've talked about, terraforming Mars or creating the space station to be able to, people can live kind of normal life if that's normal at all.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, we do it in our built environment. We build roads and we put bitumen over them because we don't like the dust coming up everywhere. We have air conditioning because we don't like the heat. We have heating because we don't like the cold. We do it in our relationships. So if a relationship's not working for us, we might consider changing that relationship, moving away from it, or maybe the opposite happens. We do it in our jobs. We make changes in our working environment to suit ourselves. So I think this is something we just naturally kind of do.
Yeah. But some people, I think some humans are better at it than others, aren't they? And I think that this can be a differentiator, can't it? The people who are able to, it's not even necessarily willing. Some people are not able to adapt as easily as others, are they?
Yeah, that's right. And this comes back to, I think, the area that I was alluding to earlier, which is the area of change fitness.
Right.
Which we'll get onto another time, but just sort of flagging now, I suppose, that this is something about our capacity to deal and handle with the pressures of these changes.
Do you think, what about the limits of the capacity to change? Because I think this is what the global warming debate is, isn't it? And the threats that climate change brings is that maybe we have a limit as well, don't we, to adaptability?
Well, maybe, but the thing is that we are certainly limited by the laws of nature. Like, for example, we can never travel at the speed of light. So people who talk about one day we'll be able to travel at the speed of light and we'll be able to visit distant galaxies is never going to happen, because it requires an infinite amount of energy to do that. You can't have an infinite amount of energy. So there are limitations, but a lot of these limitations are based on the fact that we don't know how to do it yet. We haven't figured it out. Thanks for watching this video on Humanised Workforce Future You. Please leave a rating or review for the series on the medium where you source your videos.
The transcripts for today's video can be found on craigsafin.com. Please subscribe to the series to avoid missing out on future episodes.